The trucks looked like they were carrying nothing but ordinary sand, yet Ibrahim Traoré saw something that no one else dared to notice. Before I unfold this story, remember to subscribe, because what you are about to hear will keep you questioning every single truth you were told about power and wealth. Soldiers on the road thought the convoy was harmless, just another load moving across the dry land of Burkina Faso. But Ibrahim's eyes were sharp, his silence was heavy, and his suspicion grew with every mile those engines moved forward. To everyone else, it was sand. To him, it was a secret hidden in plain sight. The convoy rolled forward with arrogance, guarded by men who looked nervous despite their rifles. Ibrahim stepped into the middle of the road with calm defiance. His soldiers followed close, unsure what they would find but certain of one thing. Their leader did not stop trucks without reason. The desert wind blew dust across the scene, making the moment feel like the calm before a storm. The guard shouted, demanding him to clear the road. Yet he stood unshaken, raising his hand not in anger but in command. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of centuries of betrayal. Open them. The guards hesitated, pretending confusion, pretending innocence. Ibrahim knew this act too well. He had studied the history of his land, how its wealth had been stolen, loaded onto ships, disguised as worthless cargo. Now, it was trucks instead of ships, but the story had not changed. The sand inside was not just sand. Beneath it lay something too valuable, something that explained why foreign companies and distant governments had eyes fixed on his soil. His soldiers moved forward, pulling the tops, forcing the guards aside. A silence spread across the convoy as the truth slowly uncovered itself. The first shovel dug into the sand, and the metallic shine underneath silenced even the wind. The men froze, staring at the glimmer that did not belong to the desert. It was not salt, not stone, not sand. It was ore, strategic minerals polished by dust but bright enough to blind the lies that had hidden them. The guards trembled, their hands on rifles, but their eyes betrayed fear. They knew the secret was out. Ibrahim looked at the shine for a moment, then lifted his gaze toward his soldiers. He did not need to speak. They understood. This was no simple convoy. This was theft wrapped in sand. Questions filled the air heavier than the dust. How many more convoys had already passed? How long had this trick been played against them? And most of all, who was waiting on the other side of the border for these stolen riches? Ibrahim's silence was not weakness. It was calculation. He had revealed the first layer of a deception larger than anyone in that desert had imagined, and this was only the beginning. The glimmer of the minerals was more than just a reflection of wealth. It was a reflection of betrayal. The soldiers who stood beside Ibrahim could feel their hearts pounding as if they had uncovered the very roots of their nation's suffering. They looked at him, waiting for his command, waiting for clarity. But he did not rush. He watched the guards tremble. He watched the drivers shift uncomfortably, and he knew in that very moment that they were only pawns. Somewhere beyond this convoy, powerful hands were pulling the strings, and these men were merely shadows of a deeper conspiracy. One of the guards tried to speak. His words cracked with fear. "It is only sand, Commander." Ibrahim stepped closer, the shine of the minerals now caught in the corner of his eye. He bent down, grabbed a handful of the sand, and let it slip slowly through his fingers. When the last grain fell, the stone beneath was left visible, undeniable. He raised it in the air, the weight of it heavy, not only in his hand but in the history it carried. "If this is only sand," he said, his voice firm and steady, "then tell me why it shines like the future of my people." The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The soldiers erupted in whispers. They had heard rumors of trucks, whispers of resources leaving in secret, but never had they seen it with their own eyes. This was no longer rumor. It was truth uncovered in daylight, truth that could no longer be denied. Ibrahim's gaze remained on the drivers. He could see guilt in their eyes, but also helplessness. They were not the masterminds. They were messengers of someone else's greed. Still, their silence confirmed everything. The air grew tense. Would the guards raise their rifles? Would blood stain the sand before the truth could even be carried to the people? Ibrahim lifted his hand, signaling his men to hold their fire. Violence was not his aim. Exposure was. The truth had to reach beyond the desert, beyond the road, beyond the convoy. It had to reach the very people whose lives were robbed silently every single day. He walked closer to the trucks, his boots sinking into the dry ground. One by one, He ordered the covers pulled aside. Each truck revealed the same story: layers of sand hiding shimmering stones, metals that could fuel industries, minerals that could shape economies, wealth that belonged to his people but was being smuggled away. The soldiers stood in disbelief. Every discovery was like a dagger driven deeper into their hearts. A question burned quietly in every mind. Who had given permission for this? No ordinary men could organize such a theft. This was not a crime of poverty. It was a crime of power. Ibrahim knew the answer would not be simple. It would lead to corridors of influence, names protected by distance and diplomacy. But the first step was already taken. The mask had been torn, and the truth was no longer hidden. The drivers finally broke down, one of them dropping to his knees, begging for mercy. His words spilled like water from a broken jar. "We only followed orders. We had no choice." Ibrahim bent down, his eyes burning with restrained fire. "Then speak," he said. "Tell me whose orders you follow." The man's lips trembled, caught between fear of death and fear of betrayal. The desert waited in silence, ready to swallow the truth or echo it forever. The man on his knees could barely form the words, his lips shaking as if the desert air itself was choking him. The rifles pointed at his back were not what terrified him most. It was a shadow of the unseen masters he served. Ibrahim's silence pressed down heavier than any weapon. "Finally," the driver whispered, his voice almost broken, "the orders came from above, from men who wear suits, not uniforms." The words were vague, but the meaning was sharp. The soldiers exchanged glances, a silent storm rising inside them. Men in suits, far from the desert, far from the dust, yet controlling the lifeblood of their land. Ibrahim leaned closer, his hand gripping the stone he had pulled from the truck. It was not gold, yet it gleamed with a promise more powerful than currency. It was a kind of mineral used in weapons, technology, machines that shaped wars and decided futures. He did not need the driver to say the full truth. He could already see the hands of foreign companies reaching across borders, digging their claws into the soil of Africa. "So, the thieves do not even dirty their hands," he said coldly. "They let others carry their chains." The driver's head lowered, sweat dripping onto the ground. Another man, unable to hold his fear, shouted, "If we speak their names, we die. If we remain silent, we die here. There is no escape." His words trembled in the air, but Ibrahim did not flinch. Instead, he stood tall and turned to his men. "You see," he said, his voice carrying through the desert, "our wealth is stolen not with honesty but with disguise. They call it trade. They call it partnership. But look at these trucks. Do you see partnership here?" His soldiers answered with silence, but their eyes told the truth. They saw betrayal carved into the sand. The wind picked up, carrying dust into their eyes, almost as if nature itself wanted to hide the shame that was being revealed. Ibrahim raised his arm, pointing at the loaded trucks. "These will not cross the border. Not today. Not ever again without truth." His words were simple, but each one carried the weight of resistance. For years, people had whispered about leaders who bowed their heads to power, who signed papers while their people starved. Ibrahim's defiance was more than an act. It was a signal. The guards, realizing their cover was destroyed, lowered their rifles slowly. Their faces showed the terror of men who knew the lie was too large to protect. Yet even in surrender, danger lingered, because behind every convoy stood men who would not tolerate exposure, men who would strike with silence or strike with force. Ibrahim knew this moment was the beginning of a war that would not be fought only with guns but with truth, with courage, and with the unbroken will of a people who had been silenced for too long. As the last torp was pulled from the final truck, the sun hit the minerals, and the desert lit up with a blinding reflection. It was almost poetic. Riches that were meant to be hidden now shone so brightly they could not be ignored. The soldiers shielded their eyes, but Ibrahim stared straight into the light, unafraid. He knew this discovery was more dangerous than any enemy he had faced. It was proof, and proof was more powerful than any bullet. The desert was glowing with the reflection of minerals, but behind that light stood shadows darker than night. Ibrahim knew that this truth could not remain in silence, yet he also understood the danger of carrying it into the open. His men looked at him, not just as their commander, but as a shield between them and the unknown storm that was now approaching. The convoy was no longer only a convoy. It had become evidence, evidence sharp enough to cut through years of silence. And evidence in the wrong hands, could disappear as quickly as it had been found. He ordered his soldiers to secure the drivers and guards, but his eyes remained fixed on the shimmering stones. They were more than minerals. They were the bones of his country, ripped from the earth and carried away like they had no value to the people who lived on the land. Ibrahim reached out and pressed his hand against the stones, as if feeling the heartbeat of his nation through them. For a brief moment, the desert was silent again, waiting for his decision. One of his soldiers, young and restless, broke the silence. "Commander, what if they come for us before we reach the capital? What if this truth never leaves the sand?" His fear was real, his words raw. Ibrahim turned to him, his face calm but his tone carrying fire. "If the truth dies here, then our struggle dies with it. But if we carry it forward, even if they strike us down, the world will know who stole from us." The soldier bowed his head, strengthened by the conviction in his leader's voice. The drivers, still bound, shifted nervously. One of them whispered to the others, thinking no one would hear, "They will send more men. They will come with machines, with helicopters, with weapons we cannot face." Ibrahim caught the words, and though he did not answer, his silence itself was louder than denial. He knew they were right. Whoever had planned this operation would not let it fail quietly. Powerful men in faraway rooms would already know that their cargo had been stopped, and those men never accepted defeat. As the sun began to lower, painting the desert in gold and red, Ibrahim gave a final command for the evening. "We move at dawn. Tonight, we guard the truth. Tomorrow, we carry it to our people." His soldiers prepared fires, positioned themselves around the convoy, and watched the horizon with wary eyes. The desert was vast, but in its silence, danger could arrive unseen. That night, Ibrahim sat alone near the trucks. The glow of the fire touched his face, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. He thought of his people, farmers who had no water, children who had no schools, families who lived without medicine, while minerals worth fortunes were smuggled away beneath layers of sand. The injustice was not new, but now it had a face, a shape, a convoy caught red-handed. He clenched the stone he had taken earlier, holding it like a weapon, like proof that history could not erase. The desert around him was silent, but deep in that silence, he felt movement. Somewhere beyond the dunes, men were coming, men who would not rest until the truth was buried again. The night carried an uneasiness that no fire could burn away. The soldiers stayed awake, circling the convoy with rifles ready, yet even their discipline could not silence the fear crawling through their thoughts. They knew the desert well, but this time the enemy was not the sand or the darkness. The enemy was invisible, watching from a distance, calculating every step they took. Somewhere, radios were already transmitting, phones were already ringing, and powerful men were demanding answers about their stolen cargo. Ibrahim sat with his back against one of the trucks, the stone he had taken earlier resting in his palm. The flicker of the fire danced over its surface, and the shine reminded him of everything at stake. It was not just a piece of mineral. It was a mirror reflecting the injustice of generations. He thought of his people, of villages where children went hungry while minerals left the soil in silence. He thought of leaders who had shaken hands with foreign powers while ignoring the cries of their own citizens. And he thought of the heavy responsibility now on his shoulders. He was holding proof, and proof had to be delivered. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was faint, but sharp enough to slice through the desert wind. One of his men jumped to his feet, scanning the dunes with tense eyes. Ibrahim raised his hand, signaling them to remain calm, but his own senses sharpened. The sound came again, low, distant, mechanical. Engines. More than one. His soldiers exchanged looks, their fears now confirmed. The enemy was moving. The convoy of truth had not gone unnoticed. Whoever owned these minerals was not ready to let them fall into the hands of the people. Trucks could be replaced, drivers could be silenced, but the stones Ibrahim carried were too valuable to lose. The enemy would come, and they would not come quietly. Ibrahim stood and addressed his men. "Listen to me. They will come tonight or tomorrow. They will come with power, with weapons, with lies. But remember this, we are not guarding minerals, we are guarding our dignity. If we let them take this, we lose more than stones, we lose our future." His voice was steady, and though the soldiers' hearts pounded, his words held them together. The sound of engines grew closer, the hum vibrating through the sand beneath their boots. The soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. The drivers tied to the trucks began to panic, whispering prayers and curses. The guards who had once stood confident now looked like ghosts caught between two deaths. Death from Ibrahim's men or death from the masters they served. Then, the horizon lit faintly with moving headlights. Dozens of them, vehicles advancing fast, kicking up dust that swallowed the stars. The men surrounding Ibrahim felt the air tighten in their lungs. This was no rescue mission for the drivers. This was a strike, planned to erase the evidence before it could spread. Ibrahim closed his hand around the stone. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of destiny. Stand ready. Tonight, the desert will remember who we are. The desert erupted with a roar of engines, the lights of approaching vehicles cutting through the darkness like knives. Dust rose in heavy clouds, choking the air, blinding the stars, but Ibrahim's men did not move back. They formed a wall around the convoy, their rifles steady, their breaths sharp. Every man knew that this night could be their last, yet not one of them lowered his weapon. Ibrahim stood at the center, the stone clenched in his fist, his presence stronger than the storm that approached. The headlights drew closer until the outlines of armored trucks and mounted guns became clear. The enemy had arrived, not as thieves but as an army sent to erase truth. The desert shook beneath the weight of their wheels, and for a moment it felt as if the land itself was warning Ibrahim to prepare. The first shout came from the darkness, an order demanding surrender. Ibrahim did not answer. His silence was defiance, his stance a refusal to bow. The enemy halted just far enough to surround the convoy, their rifles glowing under the headlights. One voice broke through again, louder and sharper. "Leave the trucks, or you will not see the dawn." His soldiers looked at him, waiting for a sign. Ibrahim stepped forward, his voice calm but thundering with conviction. "You already stole our dawn for too long. You buried our wealth beneath sand and called it trade. But tonight, the sand speaks, and it will not cover your lies anymore." His words echoed across the desert, cutting through engines, cutting through fear. The enemy expected weakness, but what they saw was fire. Ibrahim raised the stone high, showing it to the lights. Its shine reflected into their eyes, proof undeniable. A murmur spread among the soldiers on both sides. The truth was now visible to all, and no bullet could erase the sight of it. The silence stretched, suffocating, as if the desert itself held its breath. Then chaos erupted. A gunshot cracked, breaking the fragile pause. The desert exploded with fire and sound. Ibrahim's soldiers fought with fury, their voices echoing with defiance as bullets sliced the night. The enemy advanced with overwhelming force, their weapons heavier, their numbers greater, but Ibrahim's men held their ground. They were not fighting for survival alone. They were fighting to protect the soul of their nation. In the midst of fire and dust, Ibrahim did not hide. He moved among his men, his voice rising above the storm. "Hold the line. Do not let them take the truth." His courage was contagious, spreading like fire in dry grass. The soldiers around him fought harder, their fear turned into unbreakable will. The battle raged until the horizon began to shift with the first light of dawn. The desert glowed again, not with headlights but with the sun rising slowly over the dunes. The enemy, battered and unable to silence the resistance, began to retreat. Their vehicles pulled back, their engines fading into the distance, leaving behind smoke, dust, and the unbroken wall of men still standing around the convoy. Ibrahim looked at the rising sun, the stone still in his hand. His uniform was torn, his face marked with dust, but his eyes burned with victory. He raised the stone high once more, its shine now meeting the light of dawn. "This belongs to us," he declared, his voice heavy with truth, "and no shadow can steal it again."